The year is 1947. The British Raj has ended after nearly 2 centuries of rule over the Indian subcontinent. 2 new nations emerge from the ashes of empire, the Dominion of India and the Dominion of Pakistan. But with independence comes chaos, displacement, and conflict. Millions of people are forced to choose which nation they belong to. And in the Himalayan mountains, in a region called Kashmir, one choice will trigger a war that will shape the destiny of South Asia for generations to come. This is the story of the First Kashmir War, a conflict born from uncertainty, tribal invasion, and the desperate race to save a state on the brink of falling into enemy hands. It is a story of ordinary soldiers becoming heroes, of leaders making fateful decisions, and of a region caught between 2 aspiring nations. Before partition, Kashmir was not part of India or Pakistan. It was a princely state, ruled by its own Maharaja under British protection. But when Britain withdrew, the rulers of these princely states had to make a choice. Would they join India? Would they join Pakistan? Or would they remain independent? The future of Kashmir hinged on one man's decision. His name was Maharaja Hari Singh. He ruled over the state of Jammu and Kashmir with absolute authority. He was Hindu by faith, but his state was predominantly Muslim. When partition came, both India and Pakistan wanted Kashmir. The Maharaja, however, wanted something different. He dreamed of keeping Kashmir independent, as its own sovereign nation. But independence was not an easy option in 1947. The seeds of conflict had been sown months earlier. In the spring of 1947, the region of Poonch, a part of Kashmir, erupted in rebellion. The people there were angry. They paid heavy taxes to the Maharaja. Many of them were veterans of the Second World War. But the Maharaja had neglected them upon their return. More than anything, they wanted to join Pakistan. The rebellion spread rapidly. The Maharaja's forces tried to crush it, but they struggled against the tide of popular sentiment. Pakistan watched these events carefully. The Pakistani leadership, especially Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan, saw an opportunity. If they could help the rebellion succeed, perhaps Kashmir would naturally fall into their hands. In Lahore and Rawalpindi, military planners began preparing something far more ambitious than supporting a local uprising. They began planning an invasion. The plan was codenamed Operation Gulmarg. Under this plan, tribal militias from the northwest frontier province would invade Kashmir and seize control before Indian troops could arrive. Major General Akbar Khan, a senior officer in the Pakistan Army, personally developed this military strategy. He wrote a plan titled Armed Revolt Inside Kashmir. In September 1947, this plan was approved at the highest levels of the Pakistani government. Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan himself authorized it. Weapons were procured. Soldiers were recruited. And by October, everything was ready. On October 22, 1947, thousands of Pashtun tribesmen, armed and trained, crossed the border into Kashmir. Led by Major Khurshid Anwar, who was secretly backed by the Pakistani military, these fighters moved toward the capital city of Srinagar. Their numbers grew as they advanced. Some were tribal fighters from the northwest frontier province. Others were soldiers from the Pakistan Army, disguised as civilians and tribesmen. Their mission was clear: capture Kashmir for Pakistan. The initial targets fell quickly. The state forces of Kashmir, numbering only about 9,000 troops, were scattered across the region. Many of them were Muslims themselves, and when they saw the invaders, some simply surrendered or even joined them. The Pashtun fighters advanced rapidly through the Muzaffarabad sector. They pushed toward the Kashmir Valley, toward Srinagar, toward the heart of the state. But something unexpected happened. When the invaders reached the town of Baramulla, they paused. They began to loot and plunder. They took whatever they could find, attacking the local population. This delay, born from greed, would prove fateful. While the invaders wasted precious time, urgent messages were being sent to Delhi. The Maharaja was desperate. He had not wanted a war. He had not wanted this invasion. His dream of independence was crumbling. On October 24th, he sent an urgent appeal to India. Send troops, he pleaded. Save Kashmir from these raiders. But India's Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and his deputy Sardar Patel had a condition. They would send troops only if the Maharaja formally acceded to India. Only if Kashmir became part of the Indian Union. The Maharaja was cornered. The invaders were approaching his capital. He had no other choice. On October 26, 1947, he signed the Instrument of Accession. Kashmir became part of India. Within hours, the Indian government accepted the accession. The stage was set for a military response. In Delhi, at Palam airfield, a young officer was assembling his troops. Lieutenant Colonel Dewan Ranjit Rai commanded the 1st Battalion of the Sikh Regiment. He had been stationed in Gurgaon, in the state of Haryana, helping to manage refugees displaced by partition. Now, on the night of October 26, he received urgent orders. Take your troops to Kashmir. Defend Srinagar. Prevent the airfield from falling into enemy hands. It was a monumental task. The 1st Sikh Battalion had perhaps 2,000 troops. The Pashtun invaders outnumbered them. The invaders were well organized, equipped with machine guns and mortars. And Lieutenant Colonel Rai had almost no time to prepare. By midnight on October 26, he had assembled his battalion headquarters and 2 companies at Palam. They boarded Dakota aircraft, the same planes that had brought countless soldiers home from the Second World War. The journey from Delhi to Srinagar takes many hours by road, but by air it would take less than 5 hours. At first light on October 27, the Dakota aircraft carrying the 1st Sikh Battalion took off from Palam airfield. In the cockpit of the lead plane was Air Commodore Meher Singh, a legendary figure in the Indian Air Force. He was tasked with an additional responsibility. If the Srinagar airfield had been captured by the invaders, he was not to land. He was to turn back. The mission could not proceed if Srinagar was already lost. As the Dakota approached Srinagar, the pilots circled above the airfield. It was still in Indian hands, but just barely. The invaders had not yet reached it. The plane descended and touched down on the dusty airfield. It was 9 in the morning on October 27, 1947. This moment would later be celebrated as Infantry Day by the Indian Army, marking the first military operation of independent India. Lieutenant Colonel Ranjit Rai immediately understood the situation. The invaders were less than 50 kilometers from Srinagar. They had momentum. They had numbers. They had captured Baramulla. He did not have the luxury of waiting for all his troops to arrive. He had to act immediately. His strategy was bold. He would send a company under Captain Kamaljit Singh toward Baramulla to delay and harass the invaders. He would send another company under Major Harwant Singh to conduct a flag march through Srinagar city, to reassure the civilian population that Indian forces had arrived. And he himself would wait at the airfield for the remaining troops and coordinate further operations. Captain Kamaljit Singh's company headed toward Baramulla. When they approached the town, they saw smoke rising from houses and buildings. Baramulla had fallen. The invaders had looted it systematically. But instead of continuing toward Srinagar, Kamaljit Singh took a decision. He would not enter Baramulla. Instead, he would establish defensive positions at Mile 32, a point between Baramulla and Srinagar. The terrain at Mile 32 favored defense. It was near a place called Patan. The defenders could control the road and prevent the invaders from advancing further. When Lieutenant Colonel Ranjit Rai learned that his forward company had reached Mile 32, he moved there with his remaining troops. On October 27th, in the afternoon, a fierce battle erupted. The Pashtun tribesmen and their Pakistani military supporters launched a major attack on the Indian positions at Mile 32. They came with overwhelming numbers, with machine gun fire, with mortar bombardment. But the Indian troops held their ground. They repulsed the attack. Then the invaders tried to outflank them, to go around their position and cut them off from the rear. Lieutenant Colonel Ranjit Rai made another quick decision. He would withdraw his troops to a new defensive position 8 kilometers closer to Srinagar, near a place called Patan. This withdrawal would buy time for more reinforcements to arrive. It would prevent his troops from being surrounded and destroyed. During this withdrawal, while ensuring all his troops moved back safely, Lieutenant Colonel Ranjit Rai was struck by a sniper's bullet. He was wounded, but he did not abandon the field. He stayed with his men, ensuring the orderly retreat. His wound was serious, but his spirit was unbroken. He had succeeded in his mission. He had halted the enemy advance. He had bought time for India. While Lieutenant Colonel Rai was fighting at Baramulla, more troops were being airlifted from Delhi to Srinagar. Air Commodore Meher Singh organized a remarkable air operation. In the course of 5 days, over 30 Dakota aircraft made the journey from Delhi to Srinagar and back. They carried thousands of troops, ammunition, supplies, and equipment. Some of the pilots were civilians, drafted to help in the emergency. One famous pilot was Biju Patnaik, who would later become the chief minister of the state of Odisha. The arrival of fresh troops changed the balance of power. Brigadier L.P. Sen arrived at Srinagar and took overall command of the Indian and state forces in the region. The Sikh regiment was reinforced with additional battalions and brigades. The invaders, realizing that their initial opportunity had passed, began to fall back. They withdrew from their positions near Srinagar and retreated northward, towards Skardu and other areas of Kashmir. The battle for Srinagar was won. The capital had been saved. But the war was far from over. Pakistan had committed regular army troops to support the invaders. Combat operations would continue across Kashmir for the next 15 months. After the initial defeat near Srinagar, the war settled into a broader conflict. Fighting erupted in multiple parts of Kashmir. In the region of Poonch and Mirpur, the local rebellion that had started months earlier was still active. In the Jammu region, ethnic tensions and communal violence created a chaotic situation. In the mountainous regions of Ladakh and beyond, Indian and Pakistani forces clashed repeatedly. The war was not a conventional conflict between two organized armies. It was a complex mixture of tribal militias, regular Pakistani army troops, local rebels, and Indian forces. Major General Akbar Khan, who had planned Operation Gulmarg, now arrived in Kashmir to take a military role. He tried to coordinate the various fighting forces, but the situation had become unpredictable. The initial tribal invasion had succeeded in occupying significant parts of Kashmir, but it had not led to the quick conquest of the valley that Pakistan had hoped for. India, meanwhile, was responding to the crisis with unprecedented commitment. This was a young nation, barely 3 months old, and it was sending thousands of troops into combat. The military operation strained India's resources, but the political leadership was determined. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was committed to keeping Kashmir as part of India, and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the Minister of State for the princely states, was equally firm. Kashmir would remain Indian. The local population of Kashmir also played a crucial role. The political party called the National Conference, led by Sheikh Abdullah, was secular in nature. Unlike the Pakistan-backed forces, which emphasized religion, the National Conference represented a vision of Kashmir where Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, and others could live together in harmony. The National Conference actively supported the Indian Army's operations and helped drive out the Pashtun invaders. By early 1948, Indian forces had pushed the invaders back in many areas. The Pashtun tribesmen were being replaced by more organized Pakistani regular army units. The war shifted from a tribal invasion to a military conflict between India and Pakistan. Fighting in the Skardu region, in the Ladakh region, and in other mountainous areas continued intensely throughout 1948. The war extracted a terrible human cost. Estimates suggest that between 8,000 and 10,000 soldiers and civilians were killed. Beyond the deaths, approximately 1.5 million people were displaced from their homes. Entire communities were uprooted. Families were separated. The fabric of society in Kashmir was torn apart by the violence and chaos of war. The Jammu region, in particular, witnessed horrible communal violence. Hindu and Sikh minorities faced attacks from raiders and rebels. Muslim minorities in some areas faced violence from Hindu and Sikh militias. Villages were burned. Homes were destroyed. The trauma of these events would leave deep scars that would take decades to heal. By the middle of 1948, both India and Pakistan were exhausted. The war had consumed enormous resources. Neither side had achieved a decisive victory. The invaders had not succeeded in conquering Kashmir for Pakistan. But India had also not managed to push out all Pakistani forces. The situation had reached a stalemate. In December 1947, India had taken the Kashmir issue to the United Nations. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, in a historic move, referred the dispute to the UN Security Council. This was a bold and unusual decision. Many of Nehru's colleagues thought it was a mistake. They argued that India should resolve the issue militarily before going to the United Nations. But Nehru believed that international mediation would lead to a fairer solution. The United Nations established a commission called the United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan, abbreviated as UNCIP. This commission worked to mediate between the two countries. In April 1948, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 47, which called for an immediate ceasefire. It also recommended a process for resolving the Kashmir dispute. Pakistan would withdraw its forces, both regular troops and tribal militias. India would reduce its troops to a minimum level needed for law and order. Then, under UN supervision, a plebiscite would be held to allow the people of Kashmir to vote on whether they wanted to be part of India or Pakistan. It was a thoughtful proposal, but implementing it proved extremely difficult. The two countries disagreed on many crucial details. How many troops should India maintain after the ceasefire? When should the plebiscite administrator arrive? How would the different regions of Kashmir vote? These questions became obstacles to implementation. By the end of 1948, after months of negotiation, a ceasefire agreement was finally reached. On December 31, 1948, as the old year turned to the new year, the guns fell silent. A United Nations mediated ceasefire came into effect at 1 minute before midnight on December 31. It was officially implemented on January 1, 1949. With the ceasefire in place, military representatives from India and Pakistan met to demarcate the positions held by their respective forces. This demarcation line would separate Indian-controlled Kashmir from Pakistani-controlled Kashmir. On July 27, 1949, both countries signed the Karachi Agreement, formally establishing this ceasefire line. The ceasefire line, later renamed as the Line of Control, divided Kashmir into two parts. Indian-administered Jammu and Kashmir became part of the Indian Union, with Article 370 of the Indian Constitution providing its special status. Pakistani-administered Kashmir became what Pakistan called Azad Kashmir, or Free Kashmir. The line ran through some of the world's most difficult mountain terrain. United Nations military observers were positioned along the line of control to monitor compliance with the ceasefire. They remain there even today, more than 70 years later, making this one of the world's longest-lasting peacekeeping missions. The ceasefire agreement had promised a plebiscite. The people of Kashmir, it was said, would be allowed to vote on their own future. They would choose between India and Pakistan. But this plebiscite was never held. Decades have passed since 1949, and the promised vote on Kashmir's future has never taken place. Why? The answer is complicated. Both India and Pakistan claimed to support the plebiscite in principle. But neither country could agree on the conditions for holding it. How many troops should be withdrawn? Who would administer the vote? What would happen if the vote went against them? These questions created deadlock. Over time, the immediate urgency of the issue seemed to fade from international focus. The Cold War began, and Kashmir became less important to the superpowers. Meanwhile, Kashmir developed into an integral part of India's political structure. Sheikh Abdullah, who had supported Kashmir's accession to India, became the state's first prime minister under the Indian constitution. The National Conference Party implemented land reforms and sought to build a secular, multi-community society. On the Pakistani side, the leadership of Azad Kashmir developed its own administrative structure. The First Kashmir War established patterns that would persist for decades. It demonstrated that both India and Pakistan were willing to fight for Kashmir. It showed that neither country would accept the other's control over the region. The war also established that military solutions were not possible. Neither country could use force to impose a definitive solution acceptable to both sides. The conflict left several important political and legal questions unresolved. The most fundamental question, about the ultimate status of Kashmir and its people's wishes, remained open. This would lead to a second Kashmir War in 1965, when tensions over Kashmir again erupted into military conflict. But the First Kashmir War also demonstrated the courage and sacrifice of ordinary people. The soldiers who fought for India, like Lieutenant Colonel Dewan Ranjit Rai, showed extraordinary bravery. They gave their lives not for conquest or expansion, but to save a region from invasion. Ranjit Rai was posthumously awarded India's highest military medal, the Mahavir Chakra, for his gallantry. The war also showed the importance of military preparedness and swift action. India's rapid response, the airlift operation that brought troops to Srinagar within hours, prevented what could have been a complete Pakistani conquest of Kashmir. This decisive military action, combined with strong political leadership, changed the course of the conflict. The First Kashmir War ended with neither side achieving its ultimate objective. Pakistan had hoped to annex Kashmir. That did not happen. India had hoped to drive out all Pakistani forces and take complete control. That also did not happen. What resulted was a ceasefire, a dividing line, and an enduring stalemate. Yet the war did determine something crucial. It determined that Kashmir would not become part of Pakistan. The majority of Kashmir's territory remained with India. The capital city of Srinagar remained Indian. The valley, the heartland of Kashmir, remained Indian. In that sense, though the war did not resolve the conflict, it did determine the basic political outcome. The war also revealed the complexity of South Asian politics. Kashmir was not a simple ethnic or religious conflict. It involved princely state politics, great power competition, local tribalism, nationalist aspirations, and communal tensions. It involved the personal decisions of an uncertain Maharaja, the military brilliance and sacrifice of soldiers, and the diplomatic choices of political leaders. More than 70 years have passed since that dramatic October of 1947. The line of control still divides Kashmir. The promised plebiscite has still not been held. India and Pakistan have fought 3 more wars since then. The Kashmir question remains one of the most important and difficult issues in international relations. But we must remember that behind the politics and the military strategies were human stories. Stories of soldiers defending their nation. Stories of refugees fleeing violence. Stories of families separated by the line of control. Stories of a region trying to find peace after partition tore apart its social fabric. The First Kashmir War teaches us that military victory alone cannot resolve political conflicts. It teaches us that respect for self-determination, genuine negotiation, and willingness to compromise are essential for lasting peace. It teaches us that even in the midst of conflict, ordinary people show extraordinary courage and compassion. The story of the First Kashmir War is the story of India and Pakistan themselves in those early years. It is a story of emerging nations, uncertain borders, and the high human cost of territorial disputes. It is a story that still resonates today, reminding us of the importance of peace, dialogue, and respect for the aspirations of all people.